Do you think that there's an over-diagnosis of mental health conditions?
No, I think there's been an increase in mental health issues. When you think about rates of depression and anxiety amongst young people, rates of suicide, the amount of people that have suicidal thoughts or are self-harming, those rates have gone up over the last decade or so. We've had a global pandemic, which has made people feel more isolated. We've had the cost of living crisis, rents are going up, energy bills are going up, water bills are going up, council tax is going up. A lot of people feel way more insecure, way more economically insecure. And I think the other thing in society is that we've had a lot of work being done to challenge the stigma around mental health. People are a lot more comfortable talking about mental health. So I think in the past, a lot of people would have been reluctant to seek help. And I know people, personal friends of mine, who have gone out to seek mental health support, and they've been waiting. They've been on these waiting lists for a very long time. Some of them don't even get the diagnosis. So I think this is a lot more complicated than a society-wide trend where people automatically just decided, oh, you know, we all have anxiety and depression. And again, this, you know, it's a spectrum. There's different levels. Some people have anxiety and depression, and they still go into work and try to get through it. And there's others who are dealing with severe mental health issues. And I think on that front, we're not doing enough to support people with those issues.
And that's the crux of the issue, right? He's 100% correct to talk about this as a material problem due to instability, you know? Things are much more unstable. The country is in a more unstable position than it's been decades and decades and decades. Of course, that is, you know, a breeding ground for mental health problems for everybody at a time of insecurity and instability. Those are the main things that will cause you to have mental health problems, right? And just kind of laterally thinking, what do you think is more likely? That there's this big epidemic of people pretending to have mental health problems, or people who've just been overdiagnosed continuously across the board in every area of the country, in every single kind of cross-demographic problem, you know? Or do you think that there's a far more simple explanation that instead of just everybody collectively deciding to be mentally unwell by pretending that they are when they're not, by medicalizing just the normal stresses of life? Or do you think that people are more depressed because there are underlying material issues that affect everybody? I know which one my money is on.
I think there's been an overdiagnosis, or there is an overdiagnosis of mental health conditions that we're treating, sir.
The spike is so dramatic that it's hard to believe that, you know, today we really have 800,000 people more who are incapable of work because of these conditions than we have.
Hang on a minute. It being an immediate spike all at the same time is the evidence of the opposite. That is the evidence that there is an underlying material basis for these things that are affecting people broadly across the country. Again, cross-demographic, cross-location, you know. This isn't confined to a certain area of the country. This isn't confined to a certain group of people. No, it's going up across the board, across different age groups as well. Millennials are the people most likely to be affected by it in terms of increase, but the numbers are still higher in raw numbers in the 40 to 65 age group, you know? So this is the evidence of the opposite. Otherwise, what Gutahari is saying is that just overnight, precipitously, everyone just collectively decided that they were all too unfit to work because of mental health problems that they were making up, or that they had overdiagnosed. Literally overnight like that. That makes literally the opposite of any actual sense here. Whereas that is far better evidence of an immediate collective set of material conditions that have caused a drop in mental health, which Taj Ali has already spoken about as being part and parcel of the cost of living crisis.
That is...
Although when you listen to Taj saying that these things...
Yeah, and I don't underestimate the massive suffering for some people. You know, my father was a psychiatrist. I spent the first few years on the campus of a mental hospital, as they were called then. But I see work as part of the solution, not the problem. And when you sign people off sick and give them £800 a month to go off and forget about it, you forget about them too. And having a job gets you out of bed, gets you a sense of purpose, gets you camaraderie, gets you something in life that actually drags you away from not the self-indulgence of it, but the sort of the enclosed world that people get into when they...
Yeah, nothing says enclosed world like being on your own in a delivery truck for Amazon, pissing in bottles. This is a guy whose job was Downing Street Director of Communication, who's now works as a fucking journalist, just tip-tapping away on his MacBook in Starbucks, going, I love going to work, I love doing work. It really gives me a sense of purpose, tip-tapping away on my MacBook in Starbucks, right? Stealing a living, really. That just completely insulated from the actual world of work that millions of people in this country go to every day, or being shouted at by people in your customer service facing role in retail or in food service or working in a call center, constantly dealing with literally the worst people in the world who wouldn't even apologize. And then, or as I said, being tagged working in a warehouse so you're not taking too many toilet breaks. Having an electronic tag that monitors your bathroom breaks, really good for mental health. I've heard that that's incredibly excellent mental health solution, is to get tagged so that the overlord Bezos can ensure that you're not going to the bathroom too often.
You have mental health issues.
I do understand why, work can help people. Being out the household definitely helps. But in terms of what we're talking about with this benefit cut, the PIP cuts, that actually...
Well, we don't know exactly what's going to be announced tomorrow. But I'm just interrupting because we're going to find out a little bit more broadly about what we're expecting with the BBC's deputy political editor, Vicky Young. What are we expecting, Vicky?
Well, the suggestion seems to be that cuts of between £5 and £6 billion. Now, sources aren't pushing back on that. So I think that's where we're looking at. Maybe £1 billion of that will be ploughed back into the system to help potentially with things like mental health treatments, for example. Now, we talked about PIP there, personal independence payments. It does seem as if that is one area they're looking at. What is not going to happen is a freeze on those payments next year. They are due to rise in line with inflation. And it seems that now will still happen. But when it comes to eligibility, it certainly looks as if that might be one area where they're looking at. And this suggestion from...
Did you hear about this, chat? So it was leaked to the press that they were planning on freezing so that it didn't rise with inflation. So it'd be a real terms cut over time to try and save the money. Like, there's one thing in floating a policy to see if there would be backlash and then maybe turning it back a little when you realise that people don't like what you're talking about, It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do if you're testing the waters on a policy and seeing if the public will accept it. I get it. It's not exactly the best thing, but I get it. But that's not what's happened here. So this has been leaked by the Financial Times. Previous media reports claimed that Kendall was planning to freeze disability benefits so they wouldn't rise with inflation. However, some MPs believe the freeze was never a serious idea. One senior MP said it was a tactic to make it look like they've made concessions and actual cuts that aren't as bad. One Treasury official said the proposal had never been taken seriously in the department. So it wasn't even testing the waters to see if the public would accept the policy. They were just deliberately scaring the disabled so that they could gain some clout after they didn't do the thing they weren't planning to do. Genuinely, what the fuck is up with these people? These people are absolute psychopaths. So psychopathic. Just no intention to actually do it, but it's like, let's scare some disabled people so that we can farm the clout once we so graciously U-turn on it, even though they had no plan to do it in the first place.
We're treating that mental health problems are being overdiagnosed. Maybe that is an area they are looking at. Universal credit is another issue where there might be an attempt to narrow the gap between what's paid to those who are looking for work and those who are too ill to look for work. There might be changes there. And there is worth also making the point about the motivation here. Reform was always on the agenda when Labour came into power. What's happened, though, is that because of the lack of growth, because of the economy, because of the need, the Treasury wants savings. They want them more quickly. And so I think that's where the pressure is coming from.
What about the divisions within the Labour Party?
And again, trying to say that just, if we cut money away from the disabled, somehow this will increase growth. So the theory about this, by the way, to increase growth is you'd get more people into work who are currently out of work. They're economically inactive, as they would call it. And then by making them more productive, that would increase the overall supply in the economy by there being more people in work. And therefore that productive capacity would therefore lead to more growth. It's pretty basic supply side economics. The problem, of course, is this doesn't fucking work. You can't cut people's welfare to get them into work, because especially if they're sick or disabled, it's having that support that allows them the freedom to be able to work if they can do. There's plenty of people who literally cannot work at all, which they deserve as much welfare as anybody else. But the problem, of course, is that group of people who they think are close to being able to work, who just need a little bit of help to do so, who need these job coaches that they say they're going to do, another 1,000 or so work coaches they want to put into the system, which are going to have to get paid for anyway. If you take away their financial support, that makes it harder for them to deal with their disability, and therefore harder for them to cross that line in a position where they can start working again. So that's what they tried to do under the Tories, get people back into work by cutting their welfare, and it just didn't fucking work, you know? It didn't fucking work at all. The level of labour force participation in this country just has been going down. It's never really gotten above, I think, like 63% or so. So the reforms didn't work under George Osborne and IDS, and it won't work under Killer Kendall either. Especially if you're someone who has mental health problems, you know? If their concern here is so many people have mental health problems, then these are the people who are going to be even more stressed by knowing that some of their support is going to go away. It's going to affect their mental health negatively and make them more sick, not more healthy. It's totally self-defeating and has been from the very start. If you look at countries that have better labour force participation than we do, Denmark, Norway, Germany, they have better welfare states than we do as well. And of course, having people who are able to spend money in the economy, right? If it doesn't work in getting people back into work, that's less money being spent by people who engage in consumption in the economy. People who are very poor spend all their money on consumption. If you take that money away and they don't end up getting jobs and being productive elsewhere, that's just going to be less consumption overall. It's not good for the economy either.
I mentioned that there's been quite a lot of concern from a number of Labour MPs. How difficult is that going to be for the government?
Well, there's certainly been a parade of MPs going into Downing Street where they are being reassured, maybe, by ministers about what's going to happen, although they haven't been told the details about all of this. Now, a lot of the anxiety at the moment is being expressed privately rather than publicly. There are figures such as Diane Abbott who have said that, you know, cutting the welfare bill, cutting these payments is not a Labour thing to do. But there will be an issue, of course, about whether there might be a vote in the House of Commons. How will Labour MPs who are unhappy about this express that? Now, if there'd been a freeze on PIP, for example, there would have been a vote. There may now not be. I mean, there will be attempts, I'm sure, to try and get a vote. How many of those Labour MPs who are worried about this would actually rebel against the government? Of course, Keir Starmer has a huge majority, and there will be others, of course, who will say that actually the move to cut this soaring welfare bill is actually popular amongst some voters.
Thank you very much, Vicky Young. First of all, Lauren, your reaction to the idea that you can make significant savings to the welfare bill in the way that Vicky has outlined, perhaps narrowing eligibility for things like personal independence payments and narrowing the gap between people looking for work and those on sickness benefits.
Obviously, with the eligibility, I'll have to see what's in the detail, like a lot of MPs tomorrow, around PIP eligibility. I think it's really welcome if it is indeed the case that the government is not planning to freeze PIP anymore. I think there's an important distinction between PIP and some of the reforms that we're talking about in terms of helping people back into work and supporting them properly.
Were you uncomfortable by the idea of freezing those payments? And these are PIP. You can work and claim personal independence payments. They're not means tested, and they are for people who need help day to day. Just to explain to the audience, were you unhappy about potential?
I definitely had some concerns around it, because PIP is about allowing people with disabilities and ill health conditions to be able to lead independent lives. And so obviously I'll be looking very closely at any changes to the threshold tomorrow.
Do you support what you've heard?
And that's the thing, is that they now get to just do this heel turn, having being leaked to the FT saying that it was never being intended to do so. They were just scaring the disabled for clout. That's all they were doing, you know? They're still looking at a bunch of disability cuts anyway. This doesn't make it better, you know?
Well, I have no idea what they're going to do, but they have floated one thing, which was the eligibility criteria. I wouldn't go there if I was them, because it's very complex. I resigned over that because I felt that was the wrong approach to take. First of all, PIP is, they can work in PIP, so the trick is to get into PIP and help people to work, to make them much more able to control their own lives. The big problem you've got is really more in the sickness benefit kind of definitions. That's there. And by the way, on the issue of legislation, it's statutory that if they make any changes to the PIP criteria, they have to put it through the House of Commons and through the House of Lords, and it has to go into committee, and the same will go on sickness benefit. There's hardly anything they're talking about at the moment that does not get voted on. I have to just say that.
If they
literally, even Ian Duncan Smith is calling out Claire Kendall being too harsh in changing PIP eligibility. The man who presided over one of the most brutal and democidal welfare policies in this country's history is calling out the current Labour government, the current Labour DWP secretary, for being too nasty to the sick and disabled. Like, what more do you want, Labour voters, for you to understand that your party sucks? Like, what more do you need to prove to you that people like Liz Kendall are unsalvageable as human beings when you are to the right of Ian Duncan Smith, the man who cheered? He was cheering and waving his arms around in Parliament at the idea of taking money away from the desperate, and even he thinks you're going too far. Doesn't mean it, though. I mean, that could well be the case. It could well be the case that Ian Duncan Smith remembers his time in government and is looking at the broad reaction to these cuts on social media and doesn't want to be somebody who is championing something so unpopular because he knows he has nothing to gain from it because he's not in government, you know? Maybe he is just doing it for clout. But if he is taking the position that is anti-cut, just like Mel Stride was over the winter fuel allowance, it's a bad sign. This is the kind of evil shit we're having to do to get 5 billion of cuts. How on earth were the Tories going to get 12 billion of cuts as they promised in their manifesto? God knows, Ben. God knows how they were going to have to get 12 billion of cuts out of this already shredded system. Just shows you that Mel Stride is even more of a monster than both IDS and Killer Kendall.
They do narrow the eligibility criteria for personal independence payments, make it more difficult or tougher. Will you support it? Or
No, I won't, because I said earlier on, this is the wrong way to go. Okay, what I'm after is how you can get this under control and save money. The big problem we've got is over the whole growth in mental health issues. But the most important point, and you were making this earlier on, is that the health department does say categorically that it is a health treatment for people with depression and anxiety to have and seek work. Now, there is one plus coming, which is why the government's panicking on this, and I don't think they need to. Now, sickness benefit was never in under UC. I wanted it to be in, nobody wanted to do it. Finally, that's going in now. That gives them a real option to have jobs advisors with them, helping them to get them into work. Now, that's a big change, and that will yield quite a significant amount of reduction in the overall cost.
How much do you think? What are we talking about?
Well, we did a report on this, a variety of different things you can do. You can take a lot more than their 5 billion out, but what you do, it's positive because people are going out to work. That's the bit you do, rather than freeze or top slice stuff. That doesn't work. It'll all make it, because immediately on the internet, everybody advises everybody else exactly.
Well, there you go. IDS out here saying that that doesn't work, the thing that he knows full well doesn't work because he was one in charge of doing the thing that didn't work when he was head of the Department for Work and Pensions from 2010 to 2015. And it's fine, getting work coaches and job training of these people, excellent idea, not a problem at all. And fixing the healthcare service, also a great thing. But, you know, the Tories screwed up both of these things and Labour are doing the same.
Before I get reaction from the two of you, let's talk to Alex from Southampton. He got in touch with us by your voice, your BBC News. He's 29 and receives both personal independence payments and universal credit. Welcome to you, Alex. Can you explain your circumstances to us?
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me on. So I'm autistic and I am currently in receipt of personal independence payment and universal credit. Did you want me to talk about how my autism affects me?
Yes, in the sense that what the personal independence payments, what you use them for.
Yeah, so with my autism, I also have quite severe anxiety and low mood. But autism isn't a mental health problem. I just wanted to point that out. But I spend my PIP money on private psychologists who specialise in autism because there isn't any NHS service out there which can provide that, and that costs £120 per session. And I use those sessions to try and develop tools and strategies to help me deal with some of the quite difficult day-to-day life things that I experience. In order to hopefully eventually make me able to work, but not everybody will be able to work, and that's kind of why I'm concerned about these proposals.
Right, so you want to and get prepared.
I do want to work. I'm doing absolutely everything I possibly can. I've come on here today. People won't have seen that I've been in bed all weekend worrying about coming on and the anxiety over it.
Well done for managing to join us today, because it's important to hear from somebody who receives those payments and why and what they actually do. I mean, what are you concerned about from what you're hearing about the government's plans?
Well, I'm very concerned that it's been leaked and briefed and just all over the media for the last 2-3 weeks, and the government doesn't seem to recognise the impact of how that's making me feel, that's
No, don't you know it's all part of the Mega Brain 5D chess strategy that the McSweeney clan have all decided is best for them politically, is that you terrify people who are disabled or who have mental health problems or who are neurodivergent into thinking that they're going to have their welfare slashed. And then you say, well, we're still going to slash it, but slightly less than we were going to slash it before. And then suddenly you get to reap the benefits of being the compassionate Labour Party who've U-turned in response to public outcry, despite the fact they hadn't got any plans to do so in the first place, just toying with people's emotions and people's mental health for political clout. These people are psychopaths, by the way. I just want to point this out. This is psychopathic fucking behaviour.
what I'm concerned about. The main proposals that I'm concerned about, obviously we don't know what's going to happen, as you've said, but I'm concerned about changing the eligibility requirements for PIP, because obviously that is an in-work and out-of-work entitlement. And if I don't get PIP, then I won't be able to pay for these support sessions that I desperately need to learn skills and techniques to help with my autistic shutdowns that I get when I get overwhelmed. I unfortunately bang my head and things like that, which is just not appropriate in the workplace.
Right.
So I don't see how limiting those payments would help. And
Right.
also with the limited capability work-related element of universal credit, I understand.
No, you see, Labour just has to murder a few more poor people to fix the economy, and the huge budget surplus will allow them to create a socialist utopia. Unironically, I know you're joking, 8DX man in chat. I know that you're having a little laugh and a jokey, unserious, facetious comment. This is literally the argument I get from Labour shills. And this is 100% the argument I get from Labour shills. They'll be saying, Labour are forced to do it. They've been dealt such a bad hand by the Conservatives. They have no alternative but to throw the disabled into the mincing machine. Like, it's just constantly people saying they don't want to have to do it, but they're going to do it. Even though George Osborne said identical things. IDS said identical things in 2010. It was all a pack of lies. There was no need to. The government's economy wasn't the worst it's ever been in 2010, just like it isn't the worst it's ever been right now, even though it's pretty shit currently. It was pretty bad after the Second World War, and we built the NHS off the back of that. Come on, like they honestly believe this. There are plenty of people, who I'm sure are not nasty or malicious people, who are just so politically incurious that their response to Labour and Keir Starmer and Liz Kendall saying we need to throw the disabled into the wood chipper has been, they don't want to do it, but they've been forced to do it. And I'm sure that benefit of doubt was given to the Tories in 2010. It's probably why they got re-elected in 2015, alongside all the other stuff. And of course, there is motivated reasoning for them to think like this, If they can ignore the idea that they were always going to do this and they said they were going to do this and this was part and parcel of their kind of politics, they wouldn't have voted for the Labour Party. If they understood this, then it makes their vote seem completely unreasonable. So they have to have this motivated reasoning to go back and give themselves the benefit of that out of their political choices to support a party that were obviously going to be like this when in government.
I understand the government are also looking at that, the sickness element of that. Taking people off of that or halving the payments of that is just going to make it even more difficult to be able to get people back into work, because then they won't have the money to pay for the things that they need to help them, and they'll just be consigned to poverty.
All right, well, let me get a response from the Labour MP who is in the studio here. What would you say to Alex listening to that? Especially, I think the speculation and the briefing, it's obviously made it very difficult for people like Alex waiting to hear what's going to happen.
Yeah, I completely recognise that, and I'm really pleased that we'll be coming forward with the plans on Tuesday so that people will have clarity in.
Literally, come on, it's indefensible. And you're out here going, well, I'm glad that we've released all this stuff and now we're going to go to the bill tomorrow. Like, come on. Like, full well that you've just been spreading terror deliberately for political clout and going, well, I'm just glad that we've got the announcement tomorrow. Fuck off. I hate these people. I hate these fucking agents, these McSweeney agents that we're just going to have as part of our politics for the next fucking 4.5 years of my bloody life, just constantly going on our televisions every single day to tell us that actually, we have been at war with erasure for this entire time.
in the Green Paper about what the government's planning. I obviously understand that this is, obviously a very difficult issue for a lot of people who are quite rightly frightened about any change. What I would say to reassure him, though, is to have a look at particularly what the Prime Minister said last Wednesday at Prime Minister's Question Time around the principles that will drive this welfare reform. It will be about supporting those people who can work to get back into work, and as he's just explained,
Literally just repeating government platitudes. Just agents of the Politburo being sent out to just repeat government lines about difficult choices and fixing the foundations and the dignity of work and the £22 billion black hole and Ukraine and Liz Truss crashing the economy and 14 years of Tories and reforming the NHS and using AI to bring down waiting lists. God, it's going to be insufferable.
And he wants to work, and the support system is currently failing him to do that. And so I want to change the system so that makes that journey to work much easier. But also for those people who are unable to work for whatever reason, the welfare state should support them.
Right. Does it reassure you, Alex, what you've heard there?
It doesn't, I'm afraid, because the £6 billion in cuts, which is what the government wants to make, they've decided to do that before they decide what support they're going to put in place. I would say that the system needs a complete overhaul to help people do that support, which will then have the savings come afterwards when you've actually supported people. So it doesn't, I'm afraid, I'm sorry, Laura, it doesn't reassure me at all, because the savings have to be made, as the government's been saying.
Well, Lauren,
and £6 billion. Sorry.
I mean, I agree that we should be focusing on improving the system rather than looking at a level of savings. I think that some of that has been briefed in the newspapers.
But literally, there was a judicial review that Liz Kendall's been fighting against, showing that the consultation on the previous set of reforms under the Tories were entirely done under the proviso of cost cutting rather than what's good for the disabled, That was the lie about the consultation for very similar reforms that the Conservative Party were planning pre-election. You can't come out here and convince me that the piss you're raining down on my face is actually rainwater. You can't do it. This is bollocks, It is about cost cutting. That's all it's ever been about. Welfare bill too big must bring down is the entirety of the heuristic behind these changes, rather than a discussion over what is best for the disabled. And that makes it even more dystopian and disgusting that so much of this conversation is about, well, it's so much better for people to be in work, it's a real mental health boon for you to be pissing in bottles for Amazon. Like, come on.
And we won't necessarily know the details until tomorrow.
Right. Can you take £5 to £6 billion out of the system and still support people like Alex?
I don't think you can. I mean, the experts and the charities have warned that when those initial proposals were leaked to ITV, it would push 700,000 disabled households into poverty. We know that people on PIP, disabled households, they face much higher living costs. Scope, the disability charity, estimated it to be £1,000 per month additional costs. This isn't about reforming welfare. This is about penny pinching from the Treasury, and the government's got to be honest about this. They've decided they're going to make cuts to welfare on the back of disabled people, and at some point you've got to ask, what does the Labour Party stand for? Ian Duncan-Smith's telling you he wouldn't go there. You're picking the pockets of our pensioners. You're set to preside over the highest rates of child poverty since 1998. I mean, Labour was the party that set up the welfare state, that tried to support the poorest and most vulnerable in society. If you want to raise revenue, let's talk about taxing the super rich. Let's look at wealth taxes. Why is it always the poorest and most disadvantaged in society that are having to pick up, the costs?
Lauren?
I mean, what I would say in response to that is that
Absolutely 100% correct. Literally, everything we're saying is true. Everything he is saying is true. What is the point of the Labour Party? What is the point of the Labour Party penny pinching from the fucking disabled? Why are we having this conversation? How am I having this conversation? Why are we in this position where I'm having to say this about the fucking Labour Party? It's so grotesque to me, As somebody who used to be a full-on supporter of the Labour Party, basically I've been in on the Labour Party as a political force since 2011, I was 19 at the time when I was a supporter of the Labour Party, given the betrayal of Nick Clegg, I guess. And I've been supporting them ever since 2011, even though the weak source austerity light shit that came out from Ed Miliband and Ed Balls in opposition, all the way through the Corbyn period. I was a supporter of the Labour Party for the first 9 years of my adult life, And to see the party that represents the trade unions and the disadvantaged and the idea of social justice coming into government and going, you know what, we can pay arms dealers by cutting welfare for the disabled. It's so genuinely upsetting to see. Harold Wilson once said that the Labour Party is a moral crusade, or it is nothing. And it's not even nothing anymore. It's less than nothing. It's dead to me.
Certainly my understanding is that some of the savings will be reinvested into programmes that will help people into work, and so we'll be saving money in the long term. So it's not just about arbitrary cuts. It's also about how can we use the welfare system better and invest the money in a better way to help people back into work and have a system that works better for everybody.
What do you make of this moral mission that Keir Starmer talks about? Is it about a moral mission, or is it really because the economy is under pressure and they need to make these savings?
It's both. It's a moral mission because we need to help people who are out of work to get into work. That's a moral thing. We also need to bear in mind that for everyone who's not working and being paid benefits, somebody else is working harder to pay the taxes to pay for that. And when you look at government expenditure overall, there's £300 billion in a pot that goes on welfare benefits.
Interesting. He's not talking about pensioners when he says this, because that's what's keeping pensioners afloat. If you believe that taxation pays for government spending, which it doesn't, by the way, we are a sovereign currency issuer, then you must also believe that every single pensioner is being supported by people who actually work. Given that a lot of these pensioners have better lives and are well off and probably did less work than somebody nowadays is doing, where's your discussion of the bloated pensions bill, you know, rather than picking on the disabled who've never had the ability to be able to work in quite a lot of cases, you know, or have limited ability to work? Because remember, lots of PIP claimants are in work, lots of them. There's no work requirement for this benefit. It's just there to deal with the extra living costs you have a disabled person. Surely that is the one moral thing that a government can do with taxable income, is use it to at least level the playing field for people who, through no fault of their own, have way higher living costs, which is obviously the truth for the disabled, you know? For every able-bodied or neurotypical person who's struggling with a cost of living crisis, somebody who does the same job, who's in the same situation, but also has all of the extra added costs, up to £1,000 per month, of being, for example, physically disabled, is being hit by the cost of living crisis even harder. Now, I'm not saying tax those poor people who don't have disabilities any higher. I'm not saying that. They should have lower taxes as far as I'm concerned. Why are we not targeting the super rich, as Taj Ali said? Simple as that. Have a land value tax.
Dwarfs defence expenditure when we have war in Europe and Putin on the rampage. That dwarfs investment in education. That dwarfs the kind of money we should be spending on improving infrastructure. That is money that could, for instance, if you preferred that, go to sort of alleviate the horrendous burden on students today, many of whom go on to have understandable anxiety because they leave university.
The burden for students is paying the exorbitant increases in the amount they have to pay back because of the changing rules around student loans, which is a Conservative policy. If you think there's too many burdens on fucking students, maybe you shouldn't have been a communications director for a Conservative fucking Prime Minister who was in charge of the country when they changed the rules for the repayments on student loans to make them even worse for students. You are a fucking communications person for that Prime Minister, Gusahari. What the fuck are you talking about?
But let's not ring fence a pot of money and say we can't touch that because it's a very, very big pot. And there are other worthy recipients of government money that actually need it from that pot.
Right. I mean, if we show you this money, let's talk about how you can really save that money, because evidence...
No challenge on that nonsense. No challenge at all on his statement there.
History shows that you can't very easily take out money. The graphic, which will just come up, is about, I think at the time, 2013, the introduction of personal independence payments, and the expectation or the hope was to save £1.4 billion. The actual saving was £0.1 billion or £100 million. There as an example of how difficult it is.
Yeah, I don't want to keep focusing.
It is funny to me that, again, they tried to change. The Tories were so desperate, again, to save money. They weren't looking after the disabled. They were just desperate to save money and penny pinch. So they got rid of DLA to replace it with PIP. And it just meant that the take-up was higher because people couldn't live without it.
On disability, PIP, because the real problem and you can deal with this on the sickness benefit stuff. They have separate benefits. One allows you to go to work, which is PIP, and therefore more encouragement to do that will improve their lives. But the sickness benefit one has categories that are not allowed to go to work, and they've never had anybody see them in the time that they claim the benefit. What is about to happen is a big revolution. It will come under universal credit. So my argument to the government is, fiddling around on a short-term saving just because the Chancellor has lost her fiscal rectitude for a moment, that's the wrong reason. You can save money on this by getting many of those people now on sickness benefit out of work back into work, and that requires close.
It requires a functioning health service that your party destroyed. Next question. Benefit money apparently has a 1.52 times multiplier as they spend it into the local economy. But have you considered, Vicky, that the Keynesian multiplier as an economic concept is communism to these people? Like, if you explain to these people that in our sclerotic rentier economy, you can only actually have economic activity is if you put money in the hands of people who will actually go and consume with it, which would therefore stimulate the investment into the supply side to meet that new demand, they would call you a communist if you told them that. Because that's the problem. We don't have any demand. We have to pump extra new fiat money into the economy because all that demand is getting swallowed up by the rentiers because we don't have a functioning economy that creates cyclical consumption. We don't have that. We have property and we have financial assets that people pump extra liquidity into. That's all we have. We don't have a functioning economy. Whereas the idea of the Keynesian multiplier, which is something that was common sense politics in the 1950s and 60s, we justified progressive taxation and the prevention of the accumulation of assets for this reason, and our economy grew better from the 1945 till 1979 period than it has done from 79 until today.
Personal contact, which can happen now if the government invests in that. That makes a huge difference. We looked at this, we did a report on this at the Centre for Social Justice, and we are talking about many tens of billions that will be saved. But over the longer term, over the next few years, if you change things like who do you see, what are the issues around the nature of the fit for work statement, all these things are things you deal with that save money, but they save money because you actually get people back to work, which means they're then paying taxes.
But let's also...
It's also worth pointing out, when IDS said we were looking at the conditions which label people as being fit or unfit to work, what they mean is they planned, because this was the policy Mel Stride talked about that he took from this documentation, was replacing the sick note with a fit note or whatever it was, which essentially involved taking that power away from medical professionals and putting it into the hands of essentially more like work capability people, you know, who would judge you, and they weren't actually medical professionals. They were hired by like a private company like Capita or some shit. Like, that was a dystopian future that he imagined. So his savings were going to be found by trying to wheedle out those who he thought were fit for work but actually not fit for work, and try and force them to work anyway, even against the advice of medical professionals who would declare them unfit for work beforehand.
Remember that 38% of people on universal credit are in work. In-work poverty is on the rise. 7 in 10 children growing up in poverty come from a working household. And so our welfare state is subsidising bad employers who can't pay a decent wage. And those are the sorts of reforms we should be looking at. In terms of the welfare burden and the bill, you know, a lot of people who talk about welfare, they've got this image of people, benefit scroungers, people are taking the mickey. And I think there's a massive exaggeration. We had shows like Benefit Street demonising people on welfare. And when that show was produced, the British public thought that 41% of the welfare budget went to people who were unemployed. The real figure was 2%. And so I think this is quite cynical from the government. They think they can get away with this because people will believe them that people are taking the mickey. And I would just urge the government, if you want to raise revenue, let's look at the people who have benefited from so much in society. Tax the super rich. Stop going after the poorest in society.
Right, this headline in the Daily Mail, Death of the Work Ethic. Do you think there's truth to that? And listening to what Taj just said, that the language that is used has demonised people who are claiming benefits.
I think some people have always used insensitive language to discuss something that, if you discuss it soberly, as we are doing here, is an issue. So it's not helpful to demonise people, but it is worth pointing out the problem.
You literally tried to compare people who are on welfare to useless eaters by claiming they were taking money away from working people. This is Hitlerian language. Whether you like it or not, whether you mean it to be or not, This is not a sober discussion. Say that people off work were taking money away from people in work unnecessarily, you know? What the hell are you talking about?
That the more people you have who are not working and paying their way means that there's a heavier burden on other people. And there's not enough rich people, even if you tax them 100% to do that. So the people who actually carry most of the burden are the working class, sort of the copper married to the nurse who work really hard in
Well, that's actually not true. The people who earn like median wage don't pay most of the taxation. It mostly comes from PAYE earners who are in the upper echelons, who earn over like the top 5%, which is I think £100,000 or just under £100,000 now. Like the largest, the plurality of the tax actually comes from high earning PAYE people. Working class people then actually pay a huge percentage in taxation because of the progressive tax system that's good that we have, that has tax bands and marginal taxation. This attempt to claim that any increase in government spending would therefore have to fall upon the hard put upon people who work 45 hours a week, it's just not true. Again, what Taj is talking about here is a wealth tax. You could do a land value tax. Like, it wouldn't necessarily just affect the rich, but it would be taxed on assets rather than on work, which I think would also be a good strategy to employ. It would also incentivize the productive usage of capital rather than it being used for rentier income, which is parasitic rather than productive for the economy.
Genuinely stressful, overwhelmingly stressful situations, and then pay a huge chunk of their hard-earned money to support people down the street who are not working, some of whom, of course, incapable, but not all of them.
Literally useless eaters. That's the argument that he's using. Literally saying these are useless eaters living off of the money of the hard workers, right? This divisive attitude between the genuinely sick and unwell or disabled and everybody else, you know? And what's really tilting to me, what actually tilts me out of the park? Whenever you talk about taxing the rich or wealth redistribution or anything like this, right-wingers sound off. They get mad every single time and say, you're talking about the politics of envy. You're just jealous of the fact that Jeff Bezos can blow up $500 million worth of rocket fuel to eat floaty Skittles for 15 minutes, and you have to go out and listen to pricks in your call centre job. You're just envious and jealous. That's the politics of envy. And yet, every single claim that they make about people who are living off of welfare because they are incapable of working, they are being judged, again, by medical professionals, might be important to add here, that they are unfit to work, and then saying, well, you don't have to work and everybody else does. This is the fucking politics of envy. Even people with non-jobs, like Guto Hari, can accept that work isn't something people want to do, it's that they have to do, to the point at which they say, well, these people are going out and doing this thing that they hate and you're taking the money they earn from that. Which is obviously the politics of envy, trying to claim that these people who aren't working are leeches or parasites, Even if he's not saying that explicitly, it's implied with the way that he's phrasing it. And he may not know that he's doing it, he may not think that he's doing it. If you genuinely think it's better to be disabled than to go out and do work, for example, like you're claiming it would be by, again, employing this politics of envy nonsense here, then why don't you go full fucking what's the medical, is it Munchausen by proxy, that one? No, that's through somebody else where you'd be a caregiver. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, why don't you go out and be disabled?
Not all of them.
Is there a perverse incentive, as some politicians have said on this programme, within the welfare system that actually incentivises people to get a higher level of benefit from sickness benefit rather than being out of work and looking for work?
Well, I think all the charities have said that the basic rate of universal credit is inadequate. It's not something that you can live on. The amount of people on benefits, whether they are getting that higher level of universal credit or not, who are using food banks, who are going without essentials, is increasing. And we have to address this. Poverty is a serious issue in our society. And yes, perhaps there are some people who feed the dole, but I think this idea that people are living the lives of luxury is just a myth. It's nonsense.
Well, let me get a reaction from Alex, because we've also heard on...
I mean, exactly, he's right. It's all a bunch of bullshit. And again, where's their evidence for saying that, oh, well, a bunch of people who aren't actually sick are claiming sickness because universal credit is too low? Where's their evidence? Where's the evidence? Again, literally, it's just, I reckon that this is what's happening. I reckon this happening. No evidence provided whatsoever. Just a bunch of ill-informed ad hoc reckons, which was a phrase that people enjoyed me using on the show the other day.
On the programme, a concern from some claimants that in the event of being offered work, Alex, if it proves to be too much, then they worry about having to stop work and be reassessed. And there is a discussion around something called the right to try. To try work and then not lose your benefits if you have to stop. How big a concern is that for you?
Didn't even ask him about the discussion that was just had. No. You're not going to have any input or any attempt to debunk what Guto Haru and IDS were, and the Labour MP as well, were shitting out of their mouths, so to speak. No, we're going to move on and not allow you right of reply and all of this bullshit.
Well, I welcome any proposals which will help people get back into work, any genuine proposals. And I've always thought that the right to a work guarantee would be welcome. You know, I've always worried that if I got into work and I had these shutdowns and meltdowns all the time, I mean, I have tried getting jobs. I want to point out that I do contact the job centre, and if I am well enough to work over the next few years, I will contact the job centre and I will work. But there is that worry. I have no problems doing CVs and kind of interviews, but in work, that lack of support is there. So kind of then having to reapply for the whole benefits again just makes it incredibly difficult. So yeah, I do welcome that proposal. Yeah.
Ian, how typical do you think Alex's predicament is?
Well, in PIP, probably quite typical, because PIP is outside universal credit, so it's not got specific coaches to help them in the way that it has. I mean, it was never planned to come in. Sickness benefit is now coming in, and that's been a big problem, but that can be rectified once inside universal credit. The only point I'd make in this, we have a longer term problem that's been sitting behind this, which I've been screaming about sometimes, so is universal credit. COVID was a disaster for young people. Closing schools, getting them at home, often with struggling parents, maybe working in the 10-storey, 20-storey building, going off to work, having to leave their kids because the schools had closed. Many of those kids we wrote a report about called the Lost Boys. Many of them are the ones that have disappeared now out of schools and can't be found, and are certainly not in gainful employment. This is a huge problem that needs to be rectified. Family breakdowns at a rate that we haven't seen. So these are all part.
It's so funny to me. Oh my God. It's just so funny to me. Look at neoliberals going, look, the society we've created is broken down. Look at all of this alienation, and the social fabric has been completely torn apart. Where's the social contract gone? I'm like, bitch, that was you. You did this. This is the society that you helped create. Well done. Feast your eyes upon the broken society that was the brainchild of your heroes, the Thatcherite revolution, you know? You wanted a society of rugged individuals. You wanted a society where the welfare state was stripped back. You wanted a society where the public realm didn't exist and was taken up by private companies who focused solely on profit rather than social utility. You fostered an attitude of fuck you, I've got mine in huge swathes of the population, rather than actually wanting to make sure that everybody was included. That was literally the paradigm that you created. You wanted all of this, and now you're going, well, the states can have to do all of this work fixing all of these problems. And I'm just like, you don't believe the state should have fixed the problems or prevented those problems in the first place, and now you wanted to clean up the mess that you've created at triple the cost that it would have been if we actually had functioning public realm in this country before you demolished it by first off Thatcher and then George Osborne. Bitch, that's you. You did this. Hot dog man shit. It literally is. Just look at the fire I started. Absolutely.
Of the pattern of why these claims have been going up. We need to get to the root causes of this, but COVID was a disaster for those young kids. The lockdowns, the school closures have really damaged.
It's not just, I mean, COVID is a problem. Yeah, I'm not saying that COVID isn't a problem, but COVID is an even bigger problem in the societies where all of the public realm has been dismantled.
A whole generation that are now either coming on to benefits or else just disappearing completely out of the picture.
Lauren?
I mean, the other point to make about the pandemic is that we are an international outlier in getting nowhere near the employment rates that we used to have previously. But
and why do you think that is?
Happened. Well, because the system isn't working, and that's why we need to have a look at it. I mean obviously, the right to try guarantee, I think, is going to be really important.
It's the health service. These people just shut up and talk about the health service every waking moment, right? Works for Ed Davey, it can work for these people too. You know, literally patient zero, lol, for the reason why everything's going to shit in this country is the lack of the healthcare service because of the fucking shit that IDS and his cronies did when they were in government, you know? the Conservative Party. Everything comes back to the NHS. Everything comes back to it because the waiting list has been increasing ever since 2010. The levels to which the people have been getting worse healthcare has been increasing in line with the extra privatisation in the NHS. All of these things have been the problem of NHS austerity, and then it left us super exposed to the pandemic. So we didn't have the capacity built in, we didn't have the spare capacity that we needed to flatten the curve when it came to the pandemic, which left us overexposed that other countries weren't because they had invested, like France, 2% more of GDP than we did from 2010 till 2019 when they were underfunding it, you know, the longest sustained reduction in NHS spending as a percentage of GDP ever since its history, since 1948, you know? And that is why we have such a big problem. The ability of people to get back into work, having gotten things like long COVID or mental health problems as a result of what happened during the pandemic, they can't see a specialist because of the fact the NHS has been defunded and didn't cope with the pandemic because of that defunding. They could just say this, it's just true. And instead of actually going after the enemy here, which is the neoliberal politicians that fucked up the healthcare service, of course, doing things that West Streeting wants to do, like privatisation, but there you go. They're just saying, well, it's just there's the workless people, isn't it? It's workless people, it's people claiming mental health problems they don't have. Honestly, COVID was a gift for these people. They can just blame COVID for absolutely everything. Not once has austerity been mentioned in this debate. How can you have a genuine concern about benefits in this country without talking about austerity? Exactly, it's so true. It's so true, you know? And again, just like with the energy problem that we talked about beforehand in previous streams, externalities happen. Exogenous shocks to the economy happen all the time, right? And they happened across Europe with both Ukraine and the pandemic, you know, and the financial crisis too. And it's absolutely fine as a politician to say, look, we had this exogenous shock to the economy. I get it. There's going to be some problems. Sometimes that just leaves people worse off if a broad scale of input goods to the economy spike in price because of global instability. People have to put up with that. I'm sorry, it's just a fact of the world. And unfortunately, sometimes those things are unavoidable. What is avoidable is how you respond and how you prepare. And the fact of austerity left us overexposed to energy shocks because we'd not divested from oil and gas like we should have done. So we were overexposed to shocks in gas prices, which we got because of the war in Ukraine. And our lack of funding in the healthcare service left us overexposed to a pandemic that they knew was going to happen. They had briefings about a potential pandemic, and they went all in on a different kind of pandemic, and therefore they were woefully underprepared, and austerity helped hammer the capacity of the healthcare service too. And we saw this with David Cameron and George Osborne being questioned in the COVID inquiry, that they thought that there wouldn't be a problem with austerity. And it was shown time and time again, there was our lack of capacity that left us overexposed, you know? So COVID happens, that will have problems. Ukraine happened, that will have problems. But lack of investment in green energy, that we should have been able to divest from gas, and lack of capacity in the healthcare service are choices the government made that left us overexposed, and they have to take the blame for the failures that caused in the result of those shocks.
Important. I've spoken to young people directly with mental health issues who say this is a huge fear for them. But I also think that the system, as well as getting them back into work, needs to have that individual support that will allow them to get into good, stable, secure, long-term employment, rather than just, with previous issues, just getting them off the Job Centre Plus books.
And the problem, of course, is that to be able to get into that level of employment, you need to be well. You need to not be sick anymore, and that requires healthcare. It's not rocket science. Again, they just try and get these people into work, whilst not thinking, well, will people actually employ them with what few vacancies, the 800,000 I think it is that we have at the moment, it's 800,000 in the economy compared to what 3 million off work. Like, it's totally unfeasible.
I mean, the thing is, Lauren does say the system is broken. Did you break the system? I mean, you were the one who oversaw those massive changes back in 2012, 2013, and that's what they've inherited.
No, because we were getting people back into work. But the main point I want to make about this is the right to try is a bit of a gimmick. Because, of course, if you're on universal credit, sickness benefit, and you go into part-time work or middle work or whatever, you don't lose your benefit, you are getting benefit, and it's tapered away as you get higher, which is why bringing sickness benefit in will help those on sickness benefit. They have the right to go to work because it's not going to be stripped off them. If they go into full-time work as taxpayers, different game altogether. But that's not what's going to happen. It's part-time work. And by the way, part-time work is really difficult now because the Chancellor has raised the threshold. So at £5,000, which is part-time work, it's really no business is going to employ you. That's where the big problem is.
Alex, you wanted to respond.
I mean, the idea that somehow very small levels of tax regulation being changed is going to be the fulcrum on which employing people who have some level of disability. Like, come on, obviously not. The actual reality is that they don't want to employ disabled people because in lots of cases they're going to be less profitable to employ. You know, this is a cost-benefit calculation that businesses make because they are concerned entirely with profit rather than social utility. Somebody who has something that requires extra compensation in the workplace, extra dispensation, is something they're not going to want to do because that costs money. That's the big, again, no one's talking about the employers here, and trying to blame slight changes in terms of what gets taxed for national insurance premiums on employers. That's not the important point of inflection here. The point of inflection is, how can you trust a business to employ somebody when it's against their financial interest to do so? Again, if you want these people to be in employment to a point which an employer would actually want to employ them in this capitalist economy that we have, we're recording, inshallah, then you're going to have to make them well enough to be able to do it in a way that will make them employable. It's as simple as that. And that involves actually helping them rather than just taking money away or just trying to work coach them into being less sick, which doesn't work. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. I'm not saying it's a bad plan to get work coaches, but that only works if you're getting these people better at the same time, which they aren't.
Yeah, I wanted to respond that on universal credit, obviously, you would be reassessed. If you get into work, you would be reassessed because you wouldn't be meeting the criteria of what you applied for. But also the limited capability for work related activity component, your benefits would reduce. And that's why I like universal credit, because it would reduce as you kind of worked more. Nobody's talking about access to work and how, I don't mind losing money to get a job if I could do the job, because it's not about money for me. It's about getting into work and paying my tax and the dignity of it. It's just I can't at the moment. But access to work has waiting lists of like a year. So it's all very well getting people back into work, but you actually need to support them to stay in that work as well.
Alex, thank you very much.
And that's what they're cutting. This is literally what they're going to cut. PIP often pays for the therapy or physical therapy that disabled people need to get privately to work because the NHS doesn't provide that sort of care anymore. Just another thing that's been stripped away out of the NHS that has now been essentially pushed onto the private sector and through state subsidy as well. We could do that for cheap if we actually had these people employed by the state. So we didn't actually have to pay for directorial salaries of the companies that privately do this and their shareholder dividends too. If this was done in the NHS in-house, it would cost less than what we would have to subsidise through welfare payments that get spent on these private provision of healthcare. Just yet another false economy that neoliberalism just has taught us by diktat that we shouldn't be doing anymore. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.